weapon is just enormous. Right? No state in its right mind would pick a fight with the Israelis. And every time it looks like the Syrians and the Israelis might get into a fight, the Syrians are backtracking like the best cornerback or safety in the NFL. It's really quite amazing. Nobody in their right mind would pick a fight with the IDF in that neck of the woods. So I think in terms of the strategic environment, conventional deterrence alone takes care of the Israelis. The other important reason for thinking about getting rid of Israeli nuclear weapons is to discourage or to prevent proliferation in the region. I think the Israelis understand full well that there is significant pressure on Iran. There will eventually be significant pressure in Iraq again once we get out of there. And especially if Iran develops nuclear weapons of its own, to get nuclear weapons. You can posit plausible scenarios as to how nuclear proliferation occurs in the Middle East over the next 50 years. And I think it's clearly not in Israel's interest to have nuclear proliferation. I think given Israel's conventional superiority, number one, number two, given its close relationship with the United States, it's not likely to change anytime soon, and given the dangers associated with proliferation, I think the Israelis would be better off in a nuclear-free Middle East. But of course, that's not going to happen because the Israeli government is so far to the right and dominated by hardliners to the point where that's virtually unthinkable in the near future. But nevertheless, I think a good case can be made for pursuing that policy. This brings me to the third question, the matter of opacity. Does opacity make sense for Israel? And to a lesser extent, what are the consequences for the United States? Just let me say what I think we mean when we talk about opacity. This is where a country has nuclear weapons, but it doesn't admit explicitly that it has those weapons, and it even hints that it might not have them. And of course, this is what the Israelis have been doing for decades now. My first question about opacity is, who are you fooling? Right. Very important question. Who's being fooled here? It seems quite clear to me that the elites in the Arab world, the elites in Europe, and the elites in the United States, and by elites I mean policymakers, experts, and even the informed public, people who pay attention to this when they go home at night and read the newspaper and read books and magazines. None of them are being fooled. We all kind of figured out a long time ago that Israel has nuclear weapons. And I've never talked to any intelligent person who pays careful attention to Middle East politics who tried to pretend to me that Israel doesn't have nuclear weapons. Indeed, we all talked as if Israel had nuclear weapons. And in fact, if you think about it, the Israelis, because they acquired those nuclear weapons for deterrence purposes, want policymakers in the Arab world and want the Americans and wanted the Soviets during the Cold War to know that they had nuclear weapons. And in fact, I think they wanted them to be quite certain they had them and to let them know that they would use them, because that's what makes deterrence work. So I don't think you were fooling the experts. Now, one might argue that one of the advantages of this is just to create a little ambiguity in the minds of elites. And then in a crisis, you drag out the weapons and make it clear you would use them. One could argue that this is what happened in the 1973 war. But that's not a very smart strategy, because if you're the Israelis, you want to avoid crises. You want to avoid the 1973 war. So you want to make it pretty clear, if not very clear, to the elites that you have these things. And they've done that. So again, the question is, who are they fooling? One might argue that this policy is good for allowing the elites in the Arab and Islamic world, especially in countries like Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia, to resist pressure from the public. Because when people down below begin to holler about the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons, the elites can say, it's not clear that they have nuclear weapons. So what this policy of opacity provides is plausible deniability. I guess you can make that argument. It was probably somewhat effective in the past, but I don't think it's very effective now, in large part because of the internet. I'm a big believer that the internet has been a game changer, and if you rely on the mainstream media and mainstream publications for your information, you're not going to learn very much about Middle East politics, especially when it comes to Israel. But we have all of these websites and blogs, and we have the Israeli press and so forth and so on. You can just learn all sorts of things about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and Middle East politics more generally that you can't learn in the mainstream media here in the United States. And the end result of this is, I think, the cat is out of the bag on this one, and everybody kind of understands it. So the Israelis can pretend, and we can pretend, that it doesn't matter. I mean that Israel doesn't have nuclear weapons, but I don't think it buys you very much. Now, to pick up on Grant's comments, he indicated that it may help in the United States because it allows policymakers in Washington to pretend that Israel doesn't have nuclear weapons. And he was complaining about the fact that its policy of opacity undermines accountability. I don't think so. I don't think it matters much at all, because there's no accountability for Israel on any issue. They don't need opacity. Listen, if I went to the Middle East and visited Israel, and I was killed, somebody shot me there, do you think there'd be any accountability? Seriously. If any of you went to the Middle East and were killed, do you think there'd be accountability? There wouldn't be. This is how outrageous this situation is. Just think about the Liberty. Think about Rachel Corrie. Think about this Turkish American who was just killed on the flotilla. There's no accountability. Israelis can do almost anything and get away with it. So the idea of opacity matters. I don't think so. The lobby basically believes it can finesse any issue. They've never seen an issue that they can't finesse. Look at what they did with the Goldstone. Judge Goldstone. Right? I followed this issue very carefully, and he asked me to put my strategist hat on. As many of you know, I went to West Point. I was in the military for 10 years, and I cut my teeth in this business by doing military matters. The first time I ever went to Israel was to study what happened in the 67 and 73 and actually the 56 wars. I can tell you in great detail how those wars were fought. I followed what happened in Gaza in 2008, 2009. Judge Goldstone, anything